Justimon has been a bit of a weird deck ever since its inception. In EX2, its focus was to be kind of like a control deck, but can also go for huge swing turns, and it would gain like loads of DP randomly. It was weird, and then we got the form changes in Critical Arm and Excel Arm, but outside of those form changes, we never really got any future support for Justimon. And while other decks in that same set of EX2 got support further down the line, Justimon was just left in the dust. However, we finally got a glimmer of hope. BT19 has introduced a brand new Digimon line for this deck. It has a brand new identity, which focuses on the device option cards that have been coming out slowly over the past couple of sets. And in line with that device support, the EX8 stuff also builds upon this strategy with the Cyberdramon X antibody and the Justimon also. However, with how the sets have been distributed here in the West, we actually got EX8 first, and we're only just getting Special Booster 2.5 or BT19 in about a couple days time. And because of this like weird distribution situation, the deck has become quite weird to play in this short amount of time. But no longer. I think this EX8 support might be just what we needed to make Justimon a pretty decent deck in the current meta. Less so the Cyberdramon X stuff, mainly the Justimon X. And the Justimon X is, I would say, pretty darn good, to the point where I think it actually enables an insane one-turn kill strategy, which is more consistent to what we had previously. And I have been testing this deck constantly with another YouTuber that may or may not be showing up later in this video. We'll get to that later on. However, in today's video, I want to showcase you my latest version of Justimon OTK, featuring the big bad himself, Justimon X antibody. Let's get into it. So let's talk about the deck, and most importantly, how Justimon OTK works in 2025. Justimon OTK actually isn't that difficult to set up with the brand new support. So let's go over some of the key cards that are used in the strategy to get to that point where you're able to swing through all your opponent's security and win on that same turn. Now, arguably one of the most important cards in this strategy is one we haven't actually seen in a while in the majority of decks, and that is the Sunrisermon promo. This card is pivotal if you haven't taken any security swings during the given turn. The thing that we're focusing on here is the inheritable. If we have more than 13k DP or more, we're then able to get an additional security check from this inheritable level 3. All you essentially need to do is hit the 13k DP mark with the Justimon Blitzarm, but that isn't really difficult to do with how Justimon Blitzarm's effect works. Another important factor for the setup is the tamers that you will be playing. In this deck, we tend to play only two different types of tamers. Izzy Izumi is our best set to free tamer of choice, mainly because it's actually the cheapest option that we can play, because we actually gain a memory back when we reveal all black cards, but also allows us to cycle and sort the top 3 cards of our deck so that we can get to our consistent pieces or the pieces that we're missing quicker than normal. It's also very nice when you hit it in security, because gaining the memory on your opponent's turn can be the difference between you winning or losing in the Digimon card game currently. And the other tamer that we play is Marvin Jackson. This card is actually pivotal for the deck because it allows us to actually gain memory if we need to get into the OTK turn, but also has Mind Link. So if we're able to Mind Link this onto our stack, which is just a machine, cyborg, or SOC, we then gain jamming and blocker. The blocker doesn't really matter that much unless you're close to losing potentially, but the jamming is very important for the deck. With the jamming inheritable, it essentially means that your Justimon OTK stack isn't going to die unless through different effects like options and massive security bombs. We're also using the adjacent Marvin Jackson support in this deck because we need to actually get this tamer out very consistently and get it out as quickly as we can. For the OTK, at minimum, you essentially need to have 2 tamers in play, and one of them needs to be a Marvin Jackson to essentially achieve protection in your given stack. Now, instead of talking about the Sunriser and the tamers that you need, let's talk about the big bad card himself that we're going to be going into to go into our OTKs. I'm obviously talking about the Justimon. And in this case, we're going to be talking about the Justimon Blitzarm. Justimon Blitzarm is obviously the most key card in this strategy at this point because it has 2 really important effects that are useful for the strategy. The when Digivolving allows us to activate 1 of 3 effects. You can either gain 2k DP for the turn, you can either unsuspend this Digimon or delete a Digimon with play cost 5 or less. There are only really 2 effects that matter here in this strategy, and that is the unsuspend and the plus 2k DP. However, what makes this even more impressive is the when attacking effect. For each tamer you have in play, when you attack, you may activate this Digimon's when digivolving effect. So if you have 2 tamers out in play, you can essentially do the when digivolving effect twice. As you might guess, with the Sunriser that I mentioned earlier, you will probably be able to gain some DP and also unsuspend this Digimon, so you're able to go for another swing turn. Now, as we've talked about the Blitzarm, let's talk about the card that essentially enables the OTK strategy as a whole. Well, I guess in a more simpler way than the previous form changes were. Justimon X Antibody costs 4 memory to go into, but like all X antibodies in the game, it's cheaper going into it from a level 6, and in this case, it's only for 1 memory. Justimon X actually provides a huge punch, quite literally I guess, providing not 1, not 2, but 3 key words: rush, piercing, security, attack +1. All of these keywords are quite frankly lovely in this kind of strategy and help us get to our OTK. Most notably, the rush is actually quite a cheeky inclusion here, allowing us to essentially play a Digimon on the same turn, and if we get to the level 6 Justimon X Antibody, we're then able to swing, making stuff like Black Scramble and just hard playing out Digimon actually quite useful in the strategy. The piercing is nice if they have a suspended Digimon as is, but it's not really that notable. What is notable is the security attack +1. The security attack +1 essentially helps us achieve the OTK more consistent, and therefore Justimon X Antibody is the way that we essentially go through the OTK. However, the key effect here is the when attacking effect on the Justimon X Antibody, which allows us to copy the when digivolving effect of a Justimon in our Digievolution sources. What that essentially means is that we get to use the Justimon Blitzarm when digivolving effect again. And for the most part, what we're going to be doing is using the unsuspend. The DP and the delete effect doesn't really matter at that point. It also has an end of a turn effect, which allows you to swing at security if your opponent has a unsuspended Digimon and you can attack the player. But that is the bulk of the new cards and the key cards within the strategy. So let's not waste any more time. Let me show you how the OTK works in a given scenario. So let's go over the OTK turn in general. So we have essentially some things that we need to make sure that we have. If your opponent has 5 security, the opponent's security is just going to be here, just so that we make it clear. So the things that we might need if they have 5 security is the Sunriser promo. This allows us to get a security attack +1 once we reach 13k DP or more. The other things that we need to know is the tamers. We need to have 2 tamers in play, most notably one being the Marvin Jackson, so we're able to essentially mind link and gain the jamming, which will protect our stack for the most part. And then also we have just additional extras like some memory boosts in this scenario. We also need to find key cards like the level 5 and the level 6 Justimons as well. The level 5 doesn't matter as much, but the Justimons you obviously need for the combo. So we are set to 3 currently, which is the perfect amount for this scenario. So first we're going to do is go into the defense training for a reduced cost of 1 into the Digimon Ace, draw, and then we use this effect. Nothing in this scenario, but that is fine. We already have the setup that we need. If we do actually have one more tamer, so let's say we do hit one more tamer, this just means that we're able to gain the 2k DP from the Justimon Blitzarm, which will allow us to use the Sunriser effect earlier in the combo, but we don't have it in this scenario, so we'll just say we only have 2. Then we put the Marvin Jackson mind link, because it can mind link to a machine, cyborg, or an SOC trait. Digimon is a cyborg, so we can put it underneath. And then we do the first swing at security. We have jamming, so it should be fine, 9k, and it's 2k, so that's fine. Then we can pop like the black memory boost going to 4, and then we can digivolve into the first level 6, which is the Justimon Blitzarm for free. This will allow us to unsuspend using its when digivolving effect, which means we can then swing again. So we are going to swing again at 12. We don't have the Sunriser inheritable here, but it is important later on when we go into the Justimon X Antibody. We can then use this when attacking effect to copy a when digivolving effect, so we're going to use the unsuspend. opponent, and then we do the additional check, which is the black memory boost for our opponent. Then for the final memory we have, we can go into the Justimon X antibody, draw, and then we can use its attack. So this time it is 13k DP because we have the Hotmon here, which gives us 1k DP extra, and then we can use the when attacking effect to essentially copy the when digivolving effect of the Justimon Blitzarm, allowing us to unsuspend once more. We're not going to gain DP, it's not really important at this point. And as we have enough DP now, we're able to do the full 3 checks, one from the security attack inheritable from Sunriser, 1 security attack +1 from the Justimon effect, and then just in general 1 additional attack. So we do 1, 2, and 3, and just like that, we are then able to swing for game. And that is how Justimon OTK works for the most part. In preparation for this video, I actually did something that I've never done before. I actually tested the deck. Alright, I'm obviously joking. Obviously when I make videos, I do test the decks. But anyways, using DCGO, I was able to get in a few games and made some adjustments to the deck list that we kind of had at an early point. Most notably was the change of egg. Previously, I was running the BT13 Dorimon, and I changed that to the EX2 Hotmon. The biggest problem I had with the Dorimon was that I was able to draw plenty of cards, but if I'm drawing plenty of cards during the OTK swing, the cards don't really matter. And what does matter actually is gaining more DP for the previously mentioned Sunrisermon. So going from the Dorimon to the Hotmon was actually quite a logical step, because now when we go into the Justimon X antibody, it is going to be guaranteed 13k DP, which means that we are able to then use the Sunrisermon inheritable if we haven't gained DP this turn. The second change that I made to this deck was changing from the RB1 Hover Respimon to the PT15 Gardromon. While it didn't come up as much in my testing, I feel like getting some sort of protection for the OTK stack is quite important in this game. And while it doesn't cover all types of deletion, it does cover for a few specific matchups. Stuff like Gallantmon deletes by effect, or stuff like option cards like the Rivals Barrage or Death Slinger also delete as an effect. With the Gardromon, it essentially just slowed that down and they had less options to actually delete the OTK stack in general. Overall though, on my testing in DCGO, I felt like I did pretty good with every deck that I was able to test against. I mean, I was taking wins from stuff like Imperial and Gallantmon and a plethora of other decks that are in the meta. But at this point, I do have to give a shout out to fellow Digimon YouTuber. Is that what we're going with? Not DigiTuber? I don't know. We'll figure out a name, I guess. VortexTCG for actually helping me test and play the deck. Now, you've heard my opinion on the deck and specific cards within the deck. I think it's good to get a different opinion though. As I mentioned before, I was testing with VortexTCG, and he has helped by giving us some insight on what it's like to play against Justimon OTK. So, take it away.
Hey everyone, it's Kavinsky, and I wanted to share my thoughts on playing into Justimon, in particular, how it plays before Special Booster 2.5. So, Vortex and I ran some quick test games to see how Justimon in its current incarnation would fare into a reasonable cross-section of decks. I grabbed a couple of random lists that I think represented pretty different power levels, which included Nightmare Soldiers as our kind of tier 3 minimum threshold, Pyramidimon as a solid tier 2 pick, Purple Hybrid as your tier 1 rep, and then Royal Knights as one of my competitive comfort picks, so to speak. Justimon really surprised me throughout the course of those 4 games. Now, granted, the only deck that I had a decent number of hours on was actually Royal Knights, and I guess to a slightly lower degree Purple Hybrids because of my recent collab with Team Deathslinger. But still, Justimon displayed a really frightening level of lethality. In the Nightmare Soldiers game, all it really took was a scramble to get back into things and secure an OTK. I'd blown up a level 5 stack with Piedmon Ace, and between the scramble, a D-Digivolution triggering Overflow, and Justimon X having Rush, well, I got blown out. It happened so quickly that I was honestly stunned. Pyramidimon also had a surprisingly bad time into Justimon, and I'll definitely take the blame here for just not being a good pilot of it, but I think even in better hands, the deck probably would struggle. Cyberdramon Ace seems like little more than pack filler to me out of the LM set, but it turns out that D-Digivolution and Tamer Spam actually go a long way in invalidating battle-oriented decks like Pyramidimon. You just lose your momentum, and then Justimon can swing enough times to OTK you on the crackback. Purple Hybrid was also a surprisingly rough match. Now, granted, I didn't see a Duskmon until the very end of the game, which was unfortunate, and, it still ended up being a pretty close one, all things considered. Justimon does struggle with faster decks, even though it loves to farm memory boosts and tamers out of security. But I do think this game did a good job in demonstrating how Justimon can kind of play that BT9 style OTK approach very well. You are, at the end of the day, in a race against the OTK turn, and if you allow Justimon to just set up in your face, then, well, nothing will save you. Not even well-timed security bombs. Royal Knights was the last game we played, and like I mentioned, this is one that I actually have a good number of hours on. I've been on a bit of a Megazoo kick lately, and I think this did expose one of the other limitations of Justimon, which is its vulnerability to control. When you're not swinging constantly and feeding Justimon the resources it needs to come out swinging, then the game does kind of grind to a halt. Justimon still isn't able to build up front as effectively as decks like Mirage Galgamon, for example, who can kind of spread pieces around on the board and stabilize. So from my point of view, I could basically prolong the game until I could go for my own OTK. It was still a near run thing, of course, and I had to constantly deviate from my usual game plan with Royal Knights to kind of nullify the potential of the OTK turn that was hanging over my head the whole time. All in all, it was a really great set of games, and it was fantastic seeing what Justimon could do in the hands of a much more seasoned player. I'm pretty convinced at this point that Vortex's OTK-centric approach is still probably the better way to play Justimon after Special Booster 2.5 releases, because honestly, the device build just demands too much space in the deck, and it takes away the explosiveness that actually gives Justimon any kind of relevance in the meta. But I'm totally open to being wrong, and at the end of the day, anything is possible.
If you want to hear more about Justimon, its history, different versions of the deck, and the future of the deck featuring the device cards, KavinskyTCG has also just uploaded a video about Justimon on his channel, going in depth about those topics. And if you watch the video, you might see me there. There will be a video link in the description down below. You will enjoy it, I hope. If you're enjoying this video, you'll probably enjoy that video too. But now, let's get into the deck profile. Okay, so let's get into the deck profile. For the egg, we play 4 Hotmon. Going into level 3s, we have 4 Sunrisermon, 4 Hagurumon, and 3 Hagurumon X Antibody. Going into level 4s, we have 4 Gardromon, 4 Airdramon, and 2 Mercurymon. Level 5s, we play 4 Cyberdramon Ace, 1 Cyberdramon X Antibody, and 3 Megadramon. And for level 6s, we play 3 Justimon Blitzarm, and 3 Justimon X Antibody. For Tamers, we play 4 Marvin Jackson, and 3 Izzy Izumi. For options, we play 3 Defense Training, 2 Black Scramble, and finishing the deck off with 3 Black Memory Boost. And that is the current version of the deck list. And that really essentially only leaves us one more thing to do. I decided to take Justimon X Antibody to my locals to see how it would do in a real life scenario. And I was quite surprised, but I'll leave it at that. Let's get into the gameplay section. Let's see how Justimon X Antibody does. So let's get into game 1, which was an interesting game. In the early game, I had no rookies, so I decided to play Airdramon to get Marvin Jackson in play quickly, while also preparing for the OTK swing later in the game. My opponent also decides to set up going into Lucemon. Following turn, I'd go into Cyberdramon Ace, but no Tamers were found, unfortunately. I do actually decide to swing at security, and using the jamming from the Marvin, I was able to get through some early extra hits in the early game. I continue continued the game by trying to search for more tamers and key pieces, while also using Marvin Mindlick to attack the security and lowering it all the way down to 1 security. My opponent did make a decent comeback, however, by going into the Beelsmon and then the Beelsmon X antibody to remove all the remaining cards in my security, but by that time I already had my stack ready to do the OTK. At this point, my opponent made it all the way back to 4 security, but due to the combo and multiple swings at security, I was able to win game 1. Game 2 was definitely different though. Once again, I had no rookie in my starting hand because, of course, I do have ways to prepare and start my early game, going into the memory boost and playing tamers to prepare for the following turns. In preparing my cards for the OTK, my opponent went into the Justimon Chaos mode, adding cards to his security, which meant the OTK became quite difficult to say the least. Another issue that I had here was actually digivolving into the Mercurymon in Raising, which meant finding a hybrid for game just became a lot more difficult than it needed to be. Now, obviously, don't get me wrong here, I was able to go into the huge swing turn and completely wipe out my opponent's security, but my opponent was able to clear my board completely and I had an empty field. I did try to stay in the game and also prepare another OTK stack, but I didn't have enough time, unfortunately, so I ended up losing game 2. Around the same time of my opponent winning game 2, we went into time and we decided to roll dice because we don't like having draws at our locals, and I roll higher, which meant I won the round and now I am 1-0 up at locals. Now, round 2 was not a fun one for both me and my opponent. My opponent is playing Beelsmon, which definitely has ways of being incredibly fast and removing security pretty quickly through its rookies, a constant pressure through Ipmons, and its big stack of Beelsmon and able to trash security. However, let's just say that game 1 was essentially none of that. My opponent bricked hard, and when I mean hard, he showed me the hand after and he only had level 6s and level 5s in his hand. He didn't draw a level 3 or 4 at all throughout this whole game, so he constantly passed the game back to me at free memory. I'm just going to keep this short. I was able to do the OTK this game. Felt like this game was a bit of a non-factor really, but let me just say game 2 certainly wasn't that. So I ended up starting the game by giving my opponent 5 memory by playing Digimon and also playing the Marvin underneath as well. So I've got a little bit of setup going off there. However, my opponent decides to go for a huge turn, going into the level 3, the level 4 Witchmon, and then also playing an Impmon to pass the turn. So it's not really looking good for me. He has pretty good setup already, but I'm able to go into the Cyberdramon. But of course, if you've played any card that has reveal top 5 and play a tamer in it, such as the Mamimon and obviously the Cyberdramon Ace now, I couldn't find a tamer during the search. So yeah, never be able to find tamers through this effect. However, I will say that in this turn I was able to go into the Justimon X antibody and actually use his end of turn effect, which allows me to swing at security, doing 2 checks at security. However, my opponent had essentially other plans and was able to go into the Beelsmon stack and do major damage to my security. Knowing that I only had like 1 turn left, I didn't really have enough time to build an OTK stack again, and that proved to be correct because my opponent then went into the Beelsmon X and then I lose game 2. Now, game 3 was definitely a lot smoother overall because I was able to find a rookie. I know, shocker, I can't believe it too. I built into a brand new stack, but unfortunately my opponent had other plans and decided to delete my stack with the Mercurymon with Death Slinger and later on Rivals Barrage for my Justimon stack, which was not good to say the least. I think my opponent couldn't find his level 4, so I still had a good enough time to rebuild here. Seeing the options that my opponents were playing in both round 1 and 2 definitely did worry me quite a bit though, because both of them do play high value option cards in their security. Luckily for me, my opponents were not able to find them in security, so I was able to build into a stack into the OTK swing turn, and as there was no security bombs, I was able to win that game. And after round 2, I was 2-0 up with Justimon OTK. Now, round 3 was going to be the final boss, and I kind of knew that it was going to be a difficult time when I found out what my opponent was playing. Red Hybrid. I'm scared of Red Hybrid due to a few factors. Red Hybrid is incredibly fast and is able to swing through security very quickly, as it turns out, and it also helps that I can't really interact with their cards, and if I hit tamers in security and I can't OTK them this turn, I essentially just lose on the spot. So it was definitely a high risk, high reward kind of matchup for me. But let's talk about game 1, and game 1 I was able to set up a decent board, going into memory boosts and early tamers tamers while I build out my top end. My opponent also has a pretty good start here, finding the promo Ukemon and some early tamers too. I can't lie, my security did help me a lot here, finding 2 tamers from the first 2 securities that were checked, one being Marvin and one being Izzy, and that was definitely useful for my plan. On the following turn, I end up removing the Ukemon because I can't let them get more advantage, and also building up another stack for blocking, which is something that I wasn't actually expecting to do with this deck today. I wasn't expecting this to be a pretty good blocker deck as it turns out, but it turns out a lot of the cards are pretty good at that. My opponent then ended up swinging with the Aldermon and his newly promoted Agunimon, but luckily for me I had the Cyberdramon Ace to answer the Agunimon, and I was able to Digivolve it and then block for him, stopping him gain advantage. Now on the following turn I was able to get into the Justimon and had everything on the field to go for game. However, I decided to be an absolute idiot. I fucked up. Because I can't attack now.
You're actually tapped.
And delete my opponent's Flamemon. It turns out that my Guardramon that I have on the field requires my opponent to have a Digimon on the field for me and my Guardramon to attack. So, with me deleting the Flamemon using Justimon's effect, I was not able to go for game that turn.
You're actually tapped.
Which was, let's just say a little bit frustrating. The worst part about this was, my opponent did make a small comeback, but luckily enough for me, I didn't throw the game and I was able to swing on the following turn for game. Now, game 2 was more of what I was expecting, if I'm being honest, where I essentially got completely beat down by Red Hybrid and wasn't able to build much of a board. I essentially had 2 issues this game. I couldn't find a level 5 and I also couldn't find a tamer to essentially save my life in any situation. This was a horrible game for me where I essentially just tried to go into level 5s and block all the things that were coming at me, but as you could have guessed, it wasn't enough. My opponent went into the Emperor Greymon and essentially just blew my dreams up completely, winning game 2. At this point, we rolled dice to find out who won the match because the store was closing and everyone was getting ready to leave. Obviously, my dreams were shattered of a 3-0 locals winning because my opponent won the dice roll, meaning that I ended up with today's result at 2 wins and 1 loss. Now, I must admit, I'm quite happy with a 2-1 result with Justimon, especially for the first time actually playing the deck in such a long time. Special Booster 2.5 is just a day away if this video comes out at the correct time, hopefully. And with that, Justimon's game plan changes pretty much overnight from an OTK deck to a device-heavy deck. And while I'm looking forward to see what devices do for the Justimon deck going forward, I'm going to be quite sad that we're essentially moving away from the OTK deck that I've kind of gotten used to over the past couple of years. It's going to be sad knowing that, essentially the Justimon Blitzarm and all the previous support is essentially just null and void because of a brand new strategy. But that is a topic for a different video. Maybe that's something you'd be interested in, but not right now. Thank you all for watching. Thanks VortexTCG for helping me with the video. If you want to see his video on Justimon, I have left a link in the description down below, but at the end there'll be a clickable link. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.